if you research Darlene's background, she really is, especially in this area, one of the leaders in this field of study and in helping people who have survived narcissists, who are working to survive narcissists, as well as treating people who have the disorder. So she has a lot to tell us about these things, and I think that it should be a really good presentation.
Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everybody. Can you hear me okay without a mic? Because I prefer not to use it, but my voice is kind of soft. Can you hear it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Oh, good. I don't have to carry this around. Maybe I'll just put it right here, if that helps. So, just a little bit of introduction. I have an office in Santa Monica. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I used to be a lawyer for nearly 20 years. I was an entertainment lawyer in Hollywood before I switched careers nearly 30 years ago. And I focus a lot on codependency and relationships. You do need to know. Okay. So, is this better? Yes. Yeah. Great, there's no feedback, so that's good. I ended up writing Codependency for Dummies, and a lot of people think that codependents are usually in relationships with alcoholics or addicts. And what was surprising to me is that once I started, after the books came out, and I kept getting calls from people that were in relationships with narcissists, even more than addicts. And the codependency that they had and some of the behaviors which I'll describe were keeping them stuck in relationships, and their self-esteem was totally flattened. And often I would see them as a couple, or occasionally a narcissist will come to me. They are less frequently patients of therapy, and I'll explain why. Last summer I wrote this book on dealing with a narcissist. It's an e-book. And I wanted to focus on how to maintain your self-respect, how to set boundaries with the narcissist, because that's really important. And sometimes people can't decide whether to stay or whether to leave, and I give you some guidelines on that. So I want to start with talking about the actual, the next slide, please. The myth of Narcissus. The story really captures what a relationship with a narcissist is like. So both partners are looking for love, but they can't get it from each other. And it's really sad. And people make jokes and have a lot of disdain for narcissists, but inside they're very damaged. And there's this profound alienation. As they're separated from, they can't connect to their real self. It's all about the other validating them. So that's why they're so dependent on other people's praise and recognition. Next. And often they boast and exaggerate. Some people will even lie about what they've done. And this is all to transcend their inner shame that they have of really not feeling good enough. And usually that's unconscious. Usually they're not aware. There are narcissists who aren't that successful, and maybe they don't brag, but they dream about their success. And they have these fantasies of fame and being the most beautiful or the most powerful. And because of gender differences and cultural differences, men will more often think about wealth and success and power, where women it's more beauty or their talents. These are just stereotypes to simplify. And next, please. Another characteristic is that they feel special. They're unique, and they only want to be with people of a certain ilk that are high status. They might want to have the best car, wear the best labels, Go to the most expensive school, the most expensive home, things like that. The best doctor, the best credentials, someone who another movie star went to, and so then they go next. And then some narcissists have an extreme sense of entitlement. So they will cut in lines, they don't think they have to follow the rules, they expect special treatment. With women, it's more usually a thought of you owe me. You owe me, I'm entitled to special treatment. Again, this offsets feelings of inferiority and deprivation from their childhood. Next. And then typically, narcissists are arrogant. I'm reminded of one client who thought I didn't charge enough. It made her look bad that her therapist wasn't charging the highest fee.
Did you accommodate?
No. So, because she wanted to go to the best. So often a narcissist will appear confident and cool, and on the outside, they might be aloof. But inside, they don't necessarily feel that way. They're still, this is a facade that they have. Next. Another trait is that they exploit others. So they have to get their needs met at all costs, even if it means trampling someone else. Now that's, again, I'm going to talk about how narcissism exists on a continuum. So not all narcissists have all of these traits, and some have them more mild than others. But when it comes to maintaining their image, and that's one of their needs, is for attention and power, they will pull out all the stops. And some will then merge into antisocial behavior, the more malignant narcissists, to exploit others. Next. Another trait, and this is also a defense to shame, is envy. So I can remember when I was a child and I was feeling very hurt because some girlfriends rejected me or didn't invite me to something or other, I don't remember. And my mother, who was a narcissist, said, well, they just envy you. So that didn't make any sense to me, and it really didn't make me feel any better. It was very confusing. But that's common about narcissists, so they don't have to feel their own insecurity. They'll just say, well, they're just envying me. Or narcissists envy others. They often envy their own children because they want to be the best. They want to be on top. So if anyone seems to excel in anywhere, any area, then they want that too. And they might go so far as try to destroy their rival. I'm thinking of a movie that came out last year, The Gift. Even though a narcissist acts superior, as I said, they're really very dependent on approval and success and power. So they're very hypersensitive to any challenge. So that actually belies how fragile they are. So they're very defensive. They dread being found out as a fraud, having their shortcomings revealed, or their authority questioned. And as I mentioned, they'll think in terms of all good or all bad. So they're either winners or losers. To be human or just ordinary would be devastating. It would be crushing to a narcissist to be just human and have human frailties. So you can see how painful it is for them to just live. They always have to maintain this facade. Next. So here are the actual criteria for NPD, and a person just has to have 5 of these, including the 3 core symptoms of lack of empathy, need for praise and approval, and admiration and grandiosity. And then after those 3, it could be, all you need is 2 more traits, like arrogance or feelings of entitlement, envy. Their boundaries were crossed, they will cross other people's boundaries. And just people are using me, I'll use it. It's like a dog-eat-dog world. And underneath those, the feeling that I'm not enough, I can't really be myself, because it's not perfect. Who I am really is not perfect, and nobody can see that. And I don't want to need anyone, because that exposes me to feeling left, abandoned, rejected. It makes me vulnerable. If I need anyone, I have to be self-sufficient. And nobody can really meet my needs. And I have to keep performing, as I said. And any sign of vulnerability equals weakness. And you can see if you idealize power and control, you can't show any weakness. So there was a movie, any of you seen the movie many years ago called The Doctor?
Mm-hmm.
It was about if I remember correctly, it was about a brain surgeon, and his wife was feeling neglected and abandoned emotionally by him, and he was a workaholic and philandering and just didn't feel that he needed her at all. And then, to his shock, he gets brain cancer. And he finally gets in touch with his fear. And as the movie progresses, he's able to actually say to his wife, I need you. And it took that kind of life-threatening experience for him to break through his armor of invulnerability and self-sufficiency. And so sometimes, if a narcissist is very successful, they can go through life and not experience their needs or their shame, or they don't want to get close to someone because that requires, a narcissist in particular requires being intimate, being authentic, being vulnerable, being open. So they rather just go on to the next party. Or they spend time in their addiction, workaholism, or sex addiction, or gambling, or drugs, or something like that, rather than be close to their partner. Pornography. So they don't have to be intimate. So intimacy is a problem, and distancing itself and withdrawing is a defense, is coping. Next. Rage is typical. You've maybe all heard the term narcissistic rage. Well, rage is different than anger. Anger is where our needs are frustrated, and we maybe can't get what we want, so we're angry about it. But rage takes on a different tone. It's when it's a wound to the self, that we feel our identity is being threatened. And we can't tolerate that. So we have to try to annihilate the other person with our rage. Of course, this is not conscious. It gets triggered, and then people just narcissists easily can do this because they're so fragile and they have to maintain this image at all costs, not just for others, but for themselves because of their denial and their shame about who they really are. So rage will push away anyone else. So if somebody disses a narcissist, they may attack them full throttle to make sure that the person never does it again. Their motto is that best defense is an offense. So if you hurt me, I'll hurt you back twice as hard. To show the person not to mess with me, that's their wall of protection because they can't take any criticism. Next. Now this is really typical of narcissists and it's very damaging to the people that love them. Projection. That's their favorite defense. And they will tell their partner that you're worthless. You're a bad parent. I've even had clients who would say that in front of their children about the other parent. You're a terrible parent. That you are have no class. That you're stupid. The things that they think about themselves, they'll project onto others. It's a typical bullying tactic. You can think of a narcissist as a bully. So their own security gets projected onto someone else who they denigrate. They can't take responsibility for things, many narcissists, because that would mean they made a mistake or they're flawed somehow, so they will blame other people, they'll blame their partner. So their partners end up walking on eggshells, and their self-esteem is down, 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 because they're always at fault. It's always my fault. What am I doing wrong? They don't realize that it's all projection. Next. Another defense to shame is contempt. So you could think of contempt as arrogance combined with anger. And it's having disdain for other people. Next. And then if you add disgust to it, so you
Now,
have,
isn't he the poster boy?
so I picked this picture because disgust is exemplified by a raised lip, upper lip.
Oh, really?
So that is, when you think of affect, you could see disgust when someone, it's like a sneer, and that shows disgust. And it's someone that they have disdain for, that they're repulsed by. Next. So there are different types of narcissists. And, well, before I get into that, let me just point out that in the general population, the number of narcissists is actually very small.
They just live in LA.
Well, one study did show that there's a higher percentage in the entertainment field, and it's understandable since they're seeking attention and admiration, so they may be drawn to that. Or that's, the industry is here, so it attracts that. But generally, across the nation, studies have shown that there's 5 or 6%. Now those studies have been challenged because most of the research is done at universities and college students who are the subjects. And college students and teenagers are usually very self-centered. So we don't know that those studies are really accurate. It's been speculated that really it's more like 1% of the population. So a lot of people have narcissistic traits. They may be arrogant, they may be selfish, but that doesn't make them a narcissist. We call it, if they don't have all the traits, subclinical narcissists. And they're more amenable to change and treatment. And they can actually be taught to empathize. I could say more about that. But recently, people are saying that there's more women narcissists, but in the past, men have outnumbered women 3-1. So there's different types, as I mentioned. The typical type that you think of is an exhibitionist narcissist. Someone who's really out there, wants to be the center of attention, brags, seeking power over other people, that kind of thing. And then there's another type called covert or closet or introverted narcissist. And maybe people overlook them. Women might fall more in that category. They're less aggressive. And sometimes they play the role of a martyr, a victim, and self-deprecating and seeming to be insecure. But underneath there's that same selfishness, sense of entitlement. They feel unappreciated, misunderstood. And it's a lot of self-pity, but it's all coming from out there. Then there's a compensatory narcissist, and they often live in this world of their imagination, their fantasies, to make up for feeling empty and worthless inside. There's the elitist narcissist, and they're very typically opportunists, maybe like the one in the movie Gift, but many times their achievements don't measure up to who they are. They're just taking credit for things that they didn't do and bragging and wanting to associate with high status people. There's the unprincipled narcissist who has no qualms about being immoral, unethical, even breaking the law at times, to get their needs met. The amorous narcissist would be like the Don Juan or the Manahari, who uses seduction and then often abandons their conquest. It's all about the chase, right? It's all about winning that feeds their ego, because they really don't have the skills to be in a relationship, and they really don't want to be bothered with anyone else's needs. And after a while, their partner starts to see who they really are, and so they need another conquest. And this amorous narcissist will exploit people with their charm, often to misrepresent themselves, be seductive to get what they want, whether it's sex or something else. And then many people refer to addicts as narcissists. But I think that when someone is in the throes of their addiction, it's the addiction that makes them act selfishly. And they may or may not be a narcissist. And when they're clean or abstinent or sober, and they're working on themselves in a program, their behavior changes. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're
A tremendous toll
a narcissist.
for the person I knew that worked on this set. But one of the things that you really talked about that I thought was really important, and which she said she finally got to, was just, she said, I just started to become much more of an observer.
Uh-huh.
I would literally just realize that just because they did something didn't mean I had to do anything. I could just sit back and wait. She says, because what I noticed is if you did what you instinctively would normally do with a normal person, they would go crazy. And then they would just destroyed lives merrily. Like, totally happy to make, she said, I saw lots of people blackballed.
Then I think what your friend did was accurate. It's just observing and not letting it get to you. Just know you're showing up for your paycheck or for your credit and doing a good job as you get, and not let it just roll off your back. And empathy can help, because you realize how fragile that person is. Now, I say in my book on dealing with a narcissist, there's a danger in empathy, and some partners will use empathy as a defense so that they can be in denial of their hurt and their pain, and they just are always like wanting to empathize with the abuser. They don't want to set boundaries because what it will do to the abuser. So it doesn't mean that it justifies abuse. It means that you understand, and it's not either or. You can be empathetic and understanding and set boundaries and say no and not want to be with that person.
Any correlation between sadism and narcissism or psychopathy?
Well, it's on a continuum. So when it's extreme malignant, then it can go over to not having a conscience at all, and sociopathy. So, but
So apart from navigating and coping with a narcissist, is it possible to change their mentality?
that's a really good question. I didn't feel like I had time to go that much into it. But in my book, in the ebook, I give criteria to look for to when a narcissist is more amenable to change, when there's more hope. And that's if they have some insight, and many narcissists do. If they're willing to go to treatment, if they take responsibility for their actions, if they don't hurt and exploit people without remorse, if they do it without remorse, if there's more sociopathy, if they lie a lot, there's going to be less sort of poor prognosis.
Right.
And usually they don't go to treatment.
Right.
Sometimes they will with the major loss, or if their spouse threatens, things like that. But to them, seeking help is demeaning, because just going to therapy or asking for help evokes the shame. They don't want to need anyone, and then if they're there, it's very difficult. One man said he had to, he went to therapy after divorce, and he said he had to have a drink in his therapy because his self-esteem was low. So it's really hard to look at themselves because it's so, they experience so much shame that's hidden. So those are other reasons. Yes.
I've read also that it can tend to get worse as they age.
Well, most personality disorders do get more rigid and with age. Yes, you had a question?
I did, but it was along the lines of hers as well, you know, treatment resistant, and also, you know, that the actual wound inside is so reminiscent of a lot of people's wounds, of not being heard or not being felt, not being mirrored. I'm a therapist as well, and I do get a lot of clients. Do you know what it is that tips them over to the narcissist to then become, what defenses that they used? Is it just the defenses that they found helpful from that initial wound, that deep wound that they have from?
Well, I think they're saying, some researchers saying now that they would have a predisposition, that there's a genetic component. That's like new research.
Right.
They've done it with twin studies.
Right.
And sometimes a narcissistic parent with several children, only one of them will be a narcissist. Or, you know, so there may be that predisposition. And then some people are just naturally have ability to introspect, where others don't. So I think if they're very extroverted and always externally focused, they will lack any insight. It makes it hard for them to look at themselves, aside from the shame. And as you said, the defenses that are learned in childhood, if it's a lot of, again, focused projection and blame, it makes it harder to look for themselves. You might be interested, as a colleague, that I have a peer review article on my website on treating narcissism.